Section 6 of Abraham Lincoln, the Practical Mystic by Francis Grierson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Nature and Prophecy. Herndon says, I cannot refrain from noting the views Lincoln held in reference to the great questions of moral and social reforms, under which he classed suffrage for women, temperance, and slavery. All such questions, he observed one day as we were discussing temperance in the office, must find lodgment with the most enlightened souls who stamp them with their approval. In God's own time they will be organized into law and woven into the fabric of all our institutions. As the divine principle permeates all nature, so Lincoln, being a pure product of nature, possessed the secret consciousness of natural power, illumined by mystical intuition and guided by the higher forces of the spirit. He realized the superiority of mind over matter, of intelligence over ignorance, of wisdom over learning, of illumination over mere knowledge. He was another Marcus Aurelius, without the influence of paganism, free from the trammels of mythology. He inquired into the mystery of his own being and delved into the darkest corners of personality and character. Some of his deepest thoughts on the mysteries of life and death were never voiced by this man who never spoke unless he deemed it imperative to speak. Lincoln, indeed, never gossiped about people and books. He was not a gossip. His jokes were for a purpose. His talk was for a purpose, and his meditations were fundamental. The seal of nature. Herndon was right when he said that Lincoln's features were stamped with the seal of nature. This is the only seal that is beyond imitation. All else can be mimicked. We have seen how ghastly one or two persons appeared when they attempted to look like Lincoln. The imitation took on the appearance of pale, dull putty. The notion that Lincoln's personality could be imitated with success was quite in keeping with that other notion that the great president was, in spite of everything, just one of the common people. But Lincoln, as he appears in popular histories, and Lincoln as he was known to his associates and those who came into personal contact with him, are two different persons. Perhaps no one has summed up the matter with such concision and force as Don Piatt, who knew him well. With all his awkwardness of manner and utter disregard of social conventionalities that seemed to invite familiarity, there was something about Abraham Lincoln that enforced respect. No man presumed on the apparent invitation to be other than respectful. I was told at Springfield that this accompanied him through life. Among his rough associates, when young, he was leader, looked up to and obeyed, because they felt of his muscle and its readiness in use. Among his associates at the bar it was attributed to his wit, which kept his duller associates at a distance. But the fact was that this power came from a sense of reserve force of intellectual ability that no one took account of save in its results. Through one of those manifestations of nature that produce a Shakespeare at long intervals, a giant had been born to the poor whites of Kentucky, and the sense of superiority possessed Lincoln at all times. Seward, Chase, and Stanton, great as they were, felt their inferiority to the master. Law and authority. We are beginning to feel the reality of that power that lies above appearance and formula, that power manifested in Job and Isaiah, which we accept as inspiration in religion, intuition, in philosophy, and illumination in art, producing saints in one age and mystical scientists in another. We float through the ether on a revolving miracle called the earth, returning again and again to attain the same figure on the dial of time. The things done by human automatons count for nothing in the course of destiny. We think we are wise when we invent a new name for an old truth, and vanity aims to confine the infinite within the limits of a stopper bottle or a glass showcase, or attain inspiration by means of a Ouija board. Can anyone conceive what would have happened to this country had Lincoln made use of such a contrivance to direct the course of his actions? The scourge of dead agnostics seems like an ironical stroke of nature to discount their disbelief. Not only does this clumsy instrument make wits like Mark Twain talk like poor Paul, but it makes philosophers reason like first-grade pupils at our common schools. Immortality is destined to have the last word, even though it be pronounced in the most fantastic manner. Lincoln believed in law, order, and authority. He believed in the mission of the churches. He was a regular worshipper in Dr. Gurley's Presbyterian congregation at the Capitol. He was a praying president like George Washington, and while he was not a member of any church, he was convinced that all the churches were necessary. He was not a free thinker, as that term is commonly used. Loose reasoning and vague, uncertain doctrines he could not abide. He demanded proofs and would not accept a man's word merely from sentimental motives. No one ever induced him to sidetrack from the main line of argument and reason. His attitude in the matter of inspiration and spiritual direction may be summed up in a few words spoken at the time a delegation of Chicago ministers came to him, urging him in God's name to free the slaves without further delay. His reply was that when the Almighty wanted to free the slaves, he would deal directly with Lincoln himself, instead of indirectly through Chicago. A vacillating president would have been influenced by such a request at such a time, but the president had faith in his own illuminations and awaited orders from a supreme source. Had he been influenced by advice given by all sorts of people who called at the White House on all sorts of missions, possessing no authority themselves, what turmoil and chaos would have resulted to the army and the nation? Practical mystic that he was, he did not seek nor wish for advice from people in matters which concerned his own judgment alone. It is true that on several occasions he was approached by persons who came with messages of various kinds, assumed to be spiritual, but Lincoln received them with a neutral politeness, sometimes mingled with a grim humor, as when Robert Dale Owen read to him a long manuscript presumed to be highly inspirational and illuminating, and Lincoln replied, "Well, for those who like that sort of thing, that is the thing they would like." Lincoln as critic. Nothing escaped Lincoln's powers of philosophical and metaphysical analysis. He did not read the Bible and Shakespeare merely for pleasure, as people read novels. He could give excellent reasons for everything he did. Even in his most listless moods, he never lost his firm grip on affairs, both general and individual. When he read a book, it was because there was something in it which helped him to penetrate deeper into the recesses of life and character. He would study a passage or a chapter until he had assimilated its wisdom and its mystical import. Lincoln was a natural critic. When Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass was first published, a copy of the book was read and discussed by several of his friends in Springfield. Lincoln at once recognized the fact that a new poetic genius had appeared, and he did not permit adverse opinions to influence his judgment. He cared nothing for the romantic in itself. He cared only for those phases of literature which induce serious philosophical and spiritual thought. While his partner read Carlyle, he read Shakespeare. In the spring of 1862, the president spent several days at Fortress Monroe, awaiting military operations upon the peninsula. As a portion of the cabinet were with him, that was temporarily the seat of government, and he bore with him constantly the burden of public affairs. His favorite diversion was reading Shakespeare. One day it chanced to be the day before the capture of Norfolk. As he sat reading alone, he called to his side Colonel Legrand B. Cannon. "You have been writing long enough, Colonel," he said. "Come in here. I want to read you a passage in Hamlet." He read the discussion on ambition between Hamlet and his courtiers, and the soliloquy in which conscience debates of a future state. His style. No criticism of Mr. Lincoln, says the Spectator, can be in any sense adequate which does not deal with his astonishing power over words. It is not too much to say of him that he is among the greatest masters of prose ever produced by the English race. Self-educated, or rather not educated at all in the ordinary sense, he contrived to obtain an insight and power in the handling and mechanism of letters such as has been given to but few men in his or indeed in any age. That the gift of oratory should be a natural gift is understandable enough, for the methods of the orator, like those of the poet, are primarily sensuous and may well be instinctive. Mr. Lincoln did not get his ability to handle prose through his gift of speech. It is in his conduct of the pedestrian portions of composition that Mr. Lincoln's genius for prose style is exhibited. Lincoln avoided the superfluous in writing as in speaking, and style came after the matter of his thought, not as a conscious effort while he was uttering his thoughts. He was not consciously a literary artist. When, in his famous inaugural address, he made pray rhyme with away, it sounded like a false note struck in the movement of a great symphony. That blemish remains like a flaw in a diamond which cannot be removed. But the miracle remains that this master of men and moods accomplished in his speeches and letters what no one else accomplished in his time. Lincoln's serenity. Lincoln, says the same writer in The Spectator, saw things as a disillusioned man sees them, and yet, in the bad sense, he never suffered any disillusionment. For suffusing and combining his other qualities was a serenity of mind which affected the whole man. He viewed the world too much as a whole to be greatly troubled or perplexed over its accidents. To this serenity of mind was due an almost total absence of indignation in the ordinary sense. This is true because, as Walt Whitman says, the foundation of his character more than any man's in history were mystic and spiritual. Lincoln was, before all things, a gentleman, says The Spectator, and the good taste inseparable from that character made it impossible for him to be spoiled by power and position. This grace and strength of character is never better shown than in the letters to his generals, victorious or defeated. If a general had to be reprimanded, he did it as only the most perfect gentleman could do it. Nevertheless, the invulnerable president did show his anger or indignation on some few occasions, and justly so. As a rule, he did not consider it worth his while to permit himself to be moved by the sayings and doings of anyone. The foolish are unworthy of indignation. They must be dealt with quietly but effectively, while the others must be managed with gentle firmness backed by the fundamentally drastic. Fuss and fury were unknown to this pioneer politician, philosophical statesman, and mystical leader. No man can be serene who doubts himself. Lincoln, when in doubt as to the actions of others, did not grope in the darkness, but waited. His invincible trust in Providence held him aloof from the petty circumstances and daily routine of intrigue, and his imagination soared in the empyrean while those around him flattered themselves that he was being influenced or led by their counsels and their interests. He treated people who bedeviled him with importunities and all sorts of advice as the wise parent treats a child who asks for the impossible. He knew that a little waiting would wear them out, and they would end by forgetting. Often, in place of a flat refusal, he would turn away the office-seeker by a sudden, adroit stroke of his humor, thus sending the man and his friends away smiling good-humoredly at Lincoln's inimitable tact. The romance of his character. There is a romance of character that accompanies people of exceptional achievements, as Emerson has so justly said, and Lincoln possessed it without being in the slightest degree conscious of the fact. This is one reason why his life surpasses in interest any book of fiction ever written. He united all the realism of pioneer life with the romance of the inexplicable and the fascination of the unexpected. Those who come to Lincoln in search of the shifting romance of bohemianism will be disappointed, for the romance of change and vacillation is the kind that leads to the poorhouse or the hospital. This romance of character, belonging as it did to the temperament of the man, was hidden from the multitude, but all could readily see the romance of the progressive events of his life. Lincoln was at times awed but not alarmed by the turn of affairs which placed him at the head of the nation. He realized the tremendous responsibility without regrets or fear. He was fully conscious of his mission, but quite unconscious of the romantic elements which enveloped it. For Lincoln's life included both the romance of character and the romance of experience. Without the first, the second would have unfitted him for the heavy responsibilities of his high office later on. He did not seek experience for the sake of experience, like so many in our day, who are under the illusion that truth and wisdom arrive perforce. He forced nothing. He followed a natural course of events, dealing with each according to the light of his own judgment, asking for no advice. Neither the romance of character nor the romance of experience comes to those who seek them. Self-consciousness dissipates romantic mystery. End of section 6.